Weird experience in the woods. My family is very outdoorsy, and every year we go to what we call hunting camp. This involves my brother, dad, myself, and close family friends, usually about 15 guys. We've been going to the same woods that my father and his dad went to over 30 years ago, and even camp in the same spot in Michigan. This is a spot tucked deep into the woods and is by no means a sanctioned campground. This area we camp by almost borders right up to the Native American land given to the tribes by the state. Now, I've heard enough of these stories, and I'm generally pretty skeptical of the more far-fetched ones, but those who know the area can clarify this, and you can Google it. For our camp, we set up a huge old canvas army tent that sleeps about 15 guys in cots. My brother and I stopped sleeping in that tent and would set up our own individual tents because amongst the other guys there is one that is an unbelievably loud sleeper. Seriously, you wouldn't even believe me if I could mimic it for you. This particular night happened 4 or 5 years ago, and it's the reason I've rejoined the group in the larger tent. Totally worth listening to the snoring to not experience this again. So generally, our days go on as follows. Hunt in the morning, come back for lunch, go back out in the afternoon, hunt, then at night eat dinner and get supper, wasted. We are pretty late doing this, and when people get too drunk or tired, they peel off from the group and go to sleep. On this night, probably about 1 a.m., there's a few of us led by the fire, and we finally decide to call it the quits for the night. I'm a notorious light sleeper, and it's difficult for me to even fall asleep. As I laid there, trying my best to drift off and ignore the unexplainable noises you hear in the woods late at night, I heard one that simply cannot be ignored, and my heart begins to race. Off in the distance, into the woods, there's a crunching noise that's growing louder and louder. It sounds just like footsteps, a crunch, crunch, crunch sound as it stepped on the fall leaves and twigs. Now, I'm not inexperienced when it comes to noises in the woods. I've done enough hunting and camping to know that the sounds of the small critters running around, or leaves and sticks falling. This was clearly the noise of footsteps walking through the woods. And on this night, there was no wind, just this crunching noise that sounded like it was coming right towards me. It got much louder and clearer until it sounded like it was right outside my tent. It just stopped, and I could hear nothing else. At this point, I was panicking, and I had a few options. I could scream for help and risk the risk of it being nothing and looking like a huge weenie once everyone wakes up. I could lay there and try to ignore it and sleep, or go out there to see for myself. I choose option 3. I quickly jumped out of my bag and scrambled to get out of the tent, ready to take whatever might be waiting for me. But by the time I was there, or I got out, there was nothing. I stood outside my tent with my flashlight, looking around in the dark forest, trying to spot anything that could have been the cause of the noise, but couldn't find a thing. Unhappily, I was forced to go back in and try to fall asleep, not knowing what was out there. Now, the really creepy part was the next morning. My dad asked the body, Jim, what he was doing by the fire late last night by himself. Jim said that he was never out there and was in his tent the whole night. My dad explained that he got up in the middle of the night to take a piss. Lots of drinking will do that to you. And Jim was just sitting by the fire all alone. When he asked him what he was doing, he just continued to stare into the fire and said nothing. My dad didn't think too much of it. He just went back to bed. That's when I told them what happened to me. But there wasn't really anything we could do to explain any of it, so we brushed it off. This is exactly how the events happened, with no exaggeration. Neither my dad nor Jim had any reason to make any of it up, and I absolutely believe them. Obviously, golden and wendigos come to mind, especially because of the proximity to the Indian land. But I'm not a superstitious person. I can't be, otherwise I would never go into these woods again. We still camp in that very same spot every year, but like I said, it's with everyone else in the big tent. We've had a few other occurrences that were weird, but we definitely think those involved actual people, more than likely Native Americans. Camped in the vicinity of a Wendigo or Bigfoot. About 7 years ago, I was on a backpacking trip with 3 friends. One ranger, the rest of us bio-botany nerds. And all 4 of us saw something that we can still not explain to this day. Day 1 went off without a hitch. It was a bit long and a lot of elevation gain. But nonetheless, we set up camp and heated beans and rice under what was one of the cleanest summer skies I can remember. This is up in Washington, and the night sky from the mountains is just unreal. Day 2 was different. All 4 of us awoke shortly before dusk to a thrill scream. Not super uncommon. Most of us are pretty seasoned hikers, campers, or backpackers. The sound of something getting killed is pretty universal. None of us could quite make it out. If I remember correctly, we assumed it was a coyote. That familiar yelp or wail. Anyways, it was pretty close, which is probably why it woke us all up. So we started scoping out a small radius around our campsite. We found what looked like somebody had put a bomb in some kind of animal. No evidence of an actual explosive. I'm just trying to give you the same picture I have in my head. A totally indecipherable heap of flesh and fur. Probably about the size of a German Shepherd. Similar fur coloration too. We discussed how odd it was for a bit, then decided, more or less, hey, what are you gonna do? And moved on. Best explanation was something tore into it and bailed. Maybe by the sound of us waking up. Day 3. Did you see that? We're winding down from a fairly short day of hiking. Tired of the past 2 days, I remember us joking about being old farts now and not being able to hustle like we could a few years prior. The sun was just making its way down over the trees while we busted out some whiskey and started boiling a pot of water for some more beans and rice. I'll never forget this moment for as long as I live. One of the crew was just launching into a story about his ex, and it went something like this. Yeah, so she was just about the worst possible kind of he gets cut off by a pop, which we all unanimously recognized, described as a tree's last leg snapping off before it falls. We all standing now, scanning the tree line. We're in a small clearing, aside from a single large tree we're next to. A few minutes go by without a sound. Nothing. Then we start hearing the forest lives make noise again. Mostly birds doing their thing. We all settle back in, presuming the tree wound up leaning up against another tree instead of hitting the forest floor. It sounds pretty close, but there aren't too many trees we need to be concerned about. Only the one next to us, but it wouldn't even be able to reach us if it fell in the middle of the night. Then another wail, like the one we heard on the first night, except more distant, though I never sense it. One of the crew says, sounded like it came from a cave, like it echoed. So we go looking for a cave in that general direction. We search for about 45 minutes before one of us suggests we just head back, as we're going to be out of sunlight soon. More importantly, it's starting to get dark, and we're a little ways from the safety of our tents. We never find anything like a cave or something like that could have caused that kind of reverb or any kind of body. Heading back towards the clearing, our campsites from the woods, something catches my friend's eye. Did you see that? He's pointing across the clearing about 9 o'clock. We're taking a direct path, so our campsite is dead ahead at 12. We all looking in that direction, scanning the tree line. Where? What? Dude, I'm telling you, there's a person right there, just beyond camp. He's visibly shaken by it, and it's pretty obvious he isn't fooling around, or thought he could be mistaken. We're nowhere near a road or town, and even the nearest trail is miles away. A handful of times we run into other backpackers in a similar way. People checking out our camp, heading in the direction of our fire. So the rest of us had a pretty open, let's go check it out mentality. But the friend who saw the figure suggests that we all take a knee and wait while we hide in the tree line's cover. So there we were, kneeling in the bush, staring at our own campsite from the other side of the clearing. When we all unanimously see a figure start to move against the brush from 9 to 8 to 7 counterclockwise. Since we all effectively 6 o'clock, this becomes increasingly unsettling. I remember noting our ranger buddy readying his rifle and another friend putting a hand on his knife. We all feeling the same uneasiness now. I say we saw a figure, but really, we could just hear and occasionally see the brush moving in that area. Ranger Buddy declares it just has to be a bear. The original spotter whispered his argument about it standing like a person. Either way, we decided getting into the clearing and making our presence known was the best choice. We either need to scare it off if it's a bear or confront it if it's a person. So we stand up and jog into the clearing shouting, "Hey bear!" This is more or less standing procedure in case you are wondering. Nothing happens. Nothing at all. We all standing in the middle of the clearing, somewhere about halfway between our 6 o'clock position and our camp, just waiting for something to happen. We're about 20 minutes away from total darkness when there's another wail from 4 o'clock, but our focus is towards 7. I whirl around before realizing one of us was already looking that way, and his face is totally pale. Then I see it too. We all do. There's a silhouette of a tall man leaning over something else, facing away from us. And then he clearly rests on one knee before turning to look our way. Our ranger buddy has his rifle in the air. Hey, who the heck is... Oh, he's about to lay into him for hunting. When the figure comes to a full stand, hard to gauge, probably about 6 foot. And then it takes off away from us. And I don't mean like a man scrambling to run away, or bear bounding off into the brush. This is more like Usain Bolt, if he were born and raised in the mountains. Never in my life have I ever seen anything like that, and I'm almost embarrassed to admit it. My first reaction was ghost. After a pretty long wait and arguing over what to do, we swing back to camp to grab a few flashlights and our lamp. We make our way over to where the figure was leaning, and it's another mound of flesh. Without getting too detailed, this time some unmistakable fox paws are intermixed. Again, it looks like it was exploded open, and the meat eaten on the spot, not harvested like a hunter. You probably wouldn't be surprised to hear we don't sleep much that night. We make jokes about encountering Sasquatch out there. I've never been a spiritual man, still not, but it's very difficult to shake the inhuman yet human supernatural nature of the way it looked and moved. None of us could make out any kind of clothing that would break up its silhouette. Not to mention, I've never personally seen something kill quite like that. The closest thing I've ever seen is a deer carcass post-bear, in a time of a year that would have been made it very hungry aggressive, closer to hibernation, which wouldn't have been doing our summer hike. What gets me is we heard the same thrill rails 3 times, and the distance between our day 2 and our day 3 site was close to 10 miles, meaning we were on the same general game trail as it was, or it had been following us.